My name is Mike Aponte, and I led a card counting team that won tens of millions of dollars from casinos at blackjack tables. And this is everything I'm authorized to tell you. Discretion and secrecy is, it's of the utmost importance, particularly since we're a cash business. That presents like a obvious potential like safety risk. We would carry around tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of cash like to and from trips. We were very structured. We had rules and policies and protocols for everything that was laid out. During my senior year, one of my best friends at MIT named Josh, we lived in the same dorm. Like one day he just told me about this blackjack card counting team he had joined. I mean, I didn't know what to make of what he was saying because I had no exposure to gambling at all. And that's when I learned very quickly that, card counting, it's a mathematically proven system. It's 100% legal. So with the MIT team, as far as the successful group, we had a really good run from 1994 through 2000, 2001. MIT is Massachusetts Institute of Technology, so it's one of the top science, math, engineering schools in the world. We would actually just practice in a classroom at MIT in the early evening, about 6 p.m. There were 4 of us that would administer all the training to everyone. The number one thing I looked at when it came to potential recruit was just kind of their general demeanor. We knew that the ability, their aptitude to actually learn how to count cards wasn't going to be an issue. So we really based things on that trust and kind of those other characteristics, the whole art of the game. We kind of had like step-by-step training. Like the first step is they have to master that basic strategy. Like, what do you do for every single hand in blackjack? There's one and only one correct play. And we call them checkouts. And then once you pass that, you could actually start participating with the team as a spotter. A spotter is someone that would just watch the tables and keep track of the count and then signal in the big player when things moved into our advantage. And then as they were progressing, the final and hardest checkout was the big player checkout. That's where you're doing everything. Perfect basic strategy, perfect running count, and then betting optimally, having like the perfect bet relative to your advantage. And then we also factored in, you had to have that extra bandwidth to be able to talk, deal with distractions. And so that's something we incorporated into our training as well, as far as like the very end of the big player checkout. Passing the big player checkout, like the top level, I would say it took people typically anywhere from 4 to 6 months. So the way we tried to train our new recruits to deal with all the pressure and the distractions in the casinos were to try to simulate that as best we could, like during our training. During the big player checkout, you had to talk. We would also incorporate where we'd have teammates that would be harassing you. They'd be playing the parts of the drunk player at the table or the pit manager that's watching you closely. And there were a few people that didn't make the cut as far as being able to handle all that multitasking and that perceived pressure. But overall, we had like extremely high success rate. We did have a few recruits where it just didn't work out. So we had one recruit where, really great guy. I think the trust level was there, but then during training, he would get so flustered when he made mistakes. But on one such occasion, like after failing, he kind of just totally lost it and like picked up his chips from the table and just flung them at the wall. And he didn't direct his anger at anyone in the team, but after that, we kind of knew he wasn't cut out for it. Because if you're going to break in this environment, what are you going to do in the casinos? I went on the first trip and won, it's like 45,000 at MGM. I went and played with 3 spotters. So I went in, I was excited, optimistic. I wasn't sure exactly what to expect, but then right from the beginning, everything was just went so smoothly. So before each session, we would have a general game plan as far as what pits are we going to play at, what was the general time frame that we're planning to play, and then also where would we would meet or exit if things both kind of ended well or not so well in terms of like getting attention from the casino. So a spotter can blend in very easily. Of course, they want to look natural and relaxed. So there is an art of it, right? Because some people naturally are more anxious and kind of stand out. Now, once the count of the table like rose into the player's advantage, then the spotter would then put out what we call the hot signal. And we had a very simple signal. They would just cross their arms like this. So I would be kind of lurking, you could say, like maybe by the slot machines. And as soon as I saw that hot signal, I would make a beeline for the table. And as I approached the table, I would identify where the open spots were. And then at that point, the spotter would pass off the running count to me using a verbal code word. So for example, for the number 11, we used the code word football, 11 players on offense and defense. Now, the really important thing when the count was being passed off was not to make any type of eye contact. So say, for example, I was coming in on the left side, the spotter ideally would look to the right and just say football. And you could actually say it pretty loud because casinos are, it's a noisy environment. And we knew that the surveillance cameras, they didn't record audio, but they could record somebody unconsciously like leaning towards the big player. Because sometimes with new recruits on their first spotting trip, they would get nervous and they would unknowingly kind of give a little tail, and then we would quickly correct them like after the session, kind of give them feedback. Well, once I got that count, football, I knew the count was 11. So then I would just sit down and just capitalize on the advantage. And I would take over from that point. And then the spotter would then walk away to count another table. And so with this strategy, with the team play, your sampling rate goes way up. Like with 3 to 4 spotters, you could sample up to 20, 24 tables per hour. So this strategy, it maximized our mathematical expected win. And it did provide that camouflage. Now, the ideal scenario is that I capitalize on that advantage, and then you expect the count to go down, like all the high cards to come out, and that's when you get blackjacks and get the tens when you double down. And then hopefully by that point, once the count dropped, one of the other spotters would have a hot shoe. So the big player is just jumping from table to table. So one potential telltale sign of a card counter is someone that's varying their bets up and down, particularly near the end of a shoe. But that alone doesn't mean you're necessarily card counting, because there's a lot of gamblers that like to fluctuate their bets up and down. I think one of the aspects in which they proved a lot is they eventually picked up on the whole team play. And so that's where an individual card counter, it's hard for an individual card counter. They can make a decent amount of money for themselves, but it's hard for an individual to really hurt a casino's bottom line. But then a team is capable of doing a lot more damage, right? With a combined bigger bankroll, kind of maximizing their betting volume. So the casinos over time did recognize, let's look for these spotters. And let's look for the big player jumping from table to table. For me, I never got nervous. I would get a bit of an adrenaline rush, but that's why you do all the work. That's why your spotters have been counting, and that's why you put in all the practice. That's kind of what you're trained for and what you live for as an advantage player. So for me, I love those moments. I didn't go in with the intention of being like a manager or a leader. I was just really focused on being the best player I could. And so I think a lot of that transition into management just came from being a really successful player. I won on that first big trip. I became the first member of the team to win $100,000 in the trip, like a few months later. And so it was just kind of a natural like progression. we were having success at the blackjack tables, we did have to start looking into disguises because one of the unavoidable aspects of advantage play, like no matter how great your persona is or your act is, like at some point, what's going to give you away is the fact that you keep winning. And then that kind of puts you on their radar. So in response to that, we would start to use, first we started with low-tech disguises, baseball caps, some sunglasses, try growing a beard or facial hair. And then later on, I actually did make a trip to LA with one of my teammates, and we actually consulted with a Hollywood makeup artist where we tried more elaborate stuff like wigs and actually a fat man suit. Overall, the disguises didn't work as well as we had hoped because you have to consider if you get barred from a casino and well known, if you come back and you're playing and you change your look up slightly, like if they start scrutinizing you, like they're gonna recognize who you are. Well, as far as the casino employees and supervisors, that would depend on just the number of tables. Like a small casino, a blackjack pit might only be 4 or 5 tables. At a place like MGM Grand, a blackjack pit could be huge. And then each pit is going to have floor people. And the floor people, they're responsible for kind of supervising like several tables. Their main job is actually just to rate players and make sure that the dealer is following proper procedure. Each pit's going to have a pit manager. And the pit manager in general is the one where you really want to keep an eye on them. Because the more senior, naturally, the more experienced and knowledgeable they tended to be. Obviously, each shift would have its own set of surveillance people. The day shift tended to be the sharpest. That would have the most senior people. And then we started focusing on the night shift and even the graveyard shift as well. The phone ringing, that was a big one. When the phone starts ringing in the pit, then that's when you have to pay even more attention. And then you also have to learn to discern between when there's actually heat. They communicate regularly in terms of like chip inventory and so forth. But for me, the telltale sign was definitely just the casino employees, their demeanor. There were times when they would try to be inconspicuous, but you could just tell from their energy and kind of their like quick glances that they were suspicious. And then as soon as you recognize there's any type of heat, our rule was to leave the casino. But there were a few times where it is more difficult to manage, particularly on the really big weekends. So as far as Vegas, we didn't play there like every week or even every month, as a lot of people would think. We focused on the high roller weekends like New Year's, Super Bowl. During the time we played, like boxing was like at its peak. There were so many great fighters, Tyson, Roy Jones, De La Hoya. Those fights were at MGM Grand, and those weekends you would have all the high rollers come in, celebrities, pro athletes, all of the wannabes. And it made for so much cover for us where you could bet $5,000, $10,000 and you wouldn't even get a second look. So during those fight weekends, we would literally have the entire team at the MGM Grand, for example. There were a number of instances where there was a very poor decision made by a member of a team. You can get too comfortable where the casino people like you and you're not getting any type of attention, and then you start to get a little complacent. So we actually did have that on one trip, and we had about 10 players there at the time. And then that's when I noticed the heat. This pit manager was looking at me, so I just got up and took off. But unfortunately, one of our other players, she didn't recognize the heat at all. So not only did she not notice the heat, she started a conversation right on the casino floor, which that's like a cardinal sin with a number of other players. And they ended up all getting nabbed by the casino. And they got taken to the back room. They didn't get beat up or anything. They got their IDs and ended up burning about 5 of our players. just from that one simple mistake from getting like too relaxed. So you have to always assume that you're being watched. Yeah, Richard Chen, he was a member of our team, actually an excellent player. And he got involved in a legal situation at Monte Carlo Casino in Las Vegas because he naturally used an alias. It's called a camouflage passport. So a camouflage passport, I believe the one he used was for Burma. It was stated as official country. Well, Burma technically doesn't exist anymore. It's known as Myanmar. And so he used that passport for his ID. It's not illegal to use an alias or even present an ID as long as it's not a legal government issued ID. But if you're presenting a passport for a country that doesn't even exist, technically that's not illegal. And so that's why Richard was awarded that $40,000 that he had won. So that was the correct decision. Well, what makes blackjack special compared to other casino games is that it's a way of quantifying what's happened before in a user-friendly way to determine when you have the advantage and then capitalize on that advantage. The system of choice by the MIT team is called the high-low card counting system, which groups the cards into 3 groups based on how they impact house edge. Now, with the game of blackjack, when you start at the beginning of a new shuffle, it doesn't matter whether it's single deck, double deck, 6 deck, or even 8 deck. There are an equal amount of high cards. The first group is the high cards, 10, Jack, Queen, King, and Ace. And overall, these cards favor the player over the long run. That gives you blackjack, which pays 3-2. That's 150% on your wager. So for example, when you're doubling down to 10 or 11, these are the cards that you want to draw. And the third benefit to the player is that when the dealer is hitting on those tough totals of 12 through 16, stiff totals, the dealer is more likely to bust if there's more of those 10 value cards remaining. So high cards favor the player. There are 2 low cards, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So at the start of a new shuffle, these cards are balanced and they essentially cancel each other out. But as soon as the dealer starts dealing the game, you can imagine that the net difference between these cards is going to constantly fluctuate. And what this does, it provides the opportunity for a skilled card counter to identify when there's a lot of high cards remaining in the game because a lot of a surplus of low cards have already been dealt. The more low cards that are remaining, that means fewer blackjacks for the player. Also, when the dealer is hitting on totals of 12 through 16, these are the cards that can turn the dealer's bad hand into the winning hand of 17 through 21. And the third group of cards in the high-low is the neutral cards, 7, 8, and 9. And living up to its name, relatively speaking, the neutral cards don't favor the house or the player. So that leaves us with high and low. And as you can see, it's a balanced count system, right? All of the high cards cancel out all the low cards in any complete number of decks, whether it's single, double, 6, or 8. Now, as far as the actual count values, the high cards, they each have a count value of -1. Now, the reason these are negative, even though these are favorable for the player, is that a card counter is thinking in terms of future probability. So, for example, the moment you get dealt a blackjack, that's great, but that also means that there's 2 fewer high cards remaining that can benefit you in subsequent play. The low cards, 2 through 6, are each going to be +1. And that's in line with the fact that as low cards are depleted from the game, player advantage increases. Because if there's been a surplus of low cards that have come out, that means that there has to be a surplus of high cards remaining. So at the start of any shuffle, the count's always going to be 0 because there's an equal amount of high and low. But then as the shoe is dealt, that count's going to be constantly fluctuating up and down. So a card counter takes advantage of those positive deviations. And the key to it is just putting in the time to get skilled at it visually. so that it becomes second nature as far as keeping track of the count. During the week, you're just like a regular student. You're eating like cafeteria food, you're going to classes, go pick up basketball with your buddies. But then on weekends, you take on this whole role and persona. So like as soon as you land in Vegas, for example, we would often get picked up by limo, under your alias, get VIP check-in, and then we would typically always stay like in the best suites, get everything fully comped, and then even get like ringside seats at the fight. So all these perks made the weekend easier, but we put in a lot of hours and worked very hard while we were there. Well, I always really enjoyed the transition. Even though it's 100% legal, you always have to be like looking over your shoulder. You always had like a simple backstory for why you had so much money. You could just give them a simple like one sentence like, oh, my family's in import export. And then in their minds, they just kind of, that's going to check that box. It did have some of that like Clark Kent the Superman feel. Like even just flying to Vegas, we're still normal, right? We want to be inconspicuous. Naturally, we kind of viewed the casinos a bit as the bad guy. And so I think that's part of what people love about the whole story, right? Just like beating the system, taking down the house. Once we started making what was a lot more money as compared to being a poor college student, our spending did increase, but we were good. We didn't increase it in an extravagant way. Like it was nice just to be able to have like a nice, sushi dinner, for example. But we were very tempered about it. There was no one on the team that went out and bought a Porsche or anything like that. I would say like the MIT teams, we did win like in the tens of millions. I mean, the most I ever won for the team in a trip was a $250,000. But as a team, our best weekend, we won $500,000 in Vegas over Super Bowl weekend. What we would do is we would set a arbitrary profit goal. Typically, it was about $350,000. So once we hit like $350,000 in profit, we would have a distribution. And so that profit, it would be divided into like 3 pools. One big pool was the investor pool. The second big pool that was equal to an investment pool was the player pool. As a player, your share of that would be the percentage of expected win that you contributed to the bank. We would meet up discreetly, and then we would confirm like all the details of our actual play. And then we did have like a third, the smallest pool was for management. So for people such as myself that spent a lot of time recruiting, training, coordinating trips. So it was like very business run, very black and white. I mean, one of the unique aspects of being a professional card counter advantage player at that time was that we just operated it in cash. At first, it was quite a jolt as a young person when you're carrying around, when you see like even $10,000 in cash, much less $100,000. But then it becomes like anything, you get immune to it pretty quickly. So it was commonplace for us to carry tens, if not hundreds of $1,000s of cash. We'd always have it in our carry-on, or actually even better, you would just have it on your person, right? Because a large amount of cash through the X-ray machine, they could potentially identify it. Like for example, when we won that $500,000 in Vegas, I was responsible for bringing back like over $300,000 in cash. I totally packed myself, and I put the last like $30,000 on top of my head underneath my baseball cap, because at the time, it was different as far as security. We didn't utilize banks at all. For example, it was pretty common just simply in my apartment, just locked in a file cabinet. I could have anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000. So, I mean, this is a huge part of why discretion was so important. Like literally, even good friends of ours didn't know, that weren't on the team. They might hear rumors, but they had no idea of the extent. So as far as like the ethics of card counting, it's not just 100% legal, but it's 100% ethical. From a business standpoint, casinos, it's not in their favor to allow advantage players to keep playing over time. Now, the vast majority of them, they're very civil. The most common way they would deal with, for example, when I would get barred from playing, is you would just get a polite tap on the shoulder, and they would say something like, "You're welcome to play any other game than blackjack." And that's it. And at that point, our policy was to never confirm or deny. Don't argue. Just simply say okay, and then you leave the premises. They could be more aggressive or hostile about it. And there also could be a difference between the corporate, like Vegas casinos, and Indian casinos. Because a lot of the Indian casinos, it was so brand new that they're just trying to figure it out. Because there was still a lot of some perception when we started playing that card counting is illegal, or at a minimum should be illegal. As far as the countermeasures that casinos can take against card counters, I mean, one simple one is they can just shuffle on you, shuffle up once you put out a big bet. I mean, the downside of that from the casinos is that it actually stops the game. So that was one kind of a bit of an old school method. Another one is they call it half shoeing you. They might move the cut card up on you. So the cut card determines the shuffle point, like how far you get to play into the game. So for example, for a 6-deck game, typically we would get to play 4.5 decks into it. So they put the cut card at 1.5 decks. Now, if you're a gambler, it doesn't matter where the cut card is, but as a card counter, you ideally would like to play as deep as possible into the shoe because you can get more information and you tend to get a higher frequency of advantage. So cutting the shoe in half is one countermeasure they especially like to do in Atlantic City, because in Atlantic City, according to state law, they're not allowed to ban advantage players. They can't kick them out, but they can take other measures such as half shoeing you. As far as casinos I've been banned from, it's a really long list. MGM Grand, Mirage, Treasure Island, Bellagio, Tahoe, like pretty much all the casinos in Tahoe. Like in Tahoe and Biloxi, they're much smaller communities. So even at that time, they had an agreement. They would share information quickly. So on one trip to Biloxi Gulfport, after I'd won like 40, 50,000, and then they escorted me out politely. Then that information got shared quickly, where I went to try to go to another casino and they instantly barred me for playing. And that's where it really accelerated kind of the burnout of players on the team such as myself, where you could go to a casino that you'd never played at before, but then you were already on kind of in that black book, so to speak. The first casino I ever got banned from in Las Vegas was Caesar's Palace. They had a list of people from MIT that was going around cheating casinos. And then at that point, they told us we had to leave the property. And then they tried to direct us to the back room. And at that point, I just refused. I said, we're not going. So eventually they relented and took us to the cab line. And they read us the official Trespass Act. Well, when it comes to who the casino's allowed to play, you can just distill it to one simple principle, like everyone's welcome to play as long as you're going to lose. It's as simple as that. I mean, they don't discriminate based on on gender, race, religion, but they can, and they do discriminate based on your skill level. And I know a lot of people get up in arms about it. I guess for me, it's just one of those facts of life that you just have to accept, and it's something that's never going to change. I obviously naturally viewed it from an extreme position, that the casinos were unethical, they were the bad guys. But then over time, I kind of see things a bit more objectively in that, they're running a business. They should have the right to protect that business interest. I think the important thing to me is that when they do that, just do it in a very legal and civil way. MIT was actually the birthplace of card counting. It was a professor named Ed Thorpe who formulated it way back in the 1960s. The MIT card counting team, it was a startup company called Strategic Investments. So there were three managers, a Harvard MBA grad and two MIT alums. So it was about $1 million they raised, and they formed a limited partnership. And their whole business model was to recruit MIT students, train them how to count cards, and then send them to casinos. And so I was recruited on the tail end of that team, Strategic Investments, in 1993. So it had like a number of issues. Was that we just had this like really large kind of bloated group, and it was a bit disjointed. Like every practice on Strategic Investments, I would see people I'd never seen before. And that also created a security issue, which ended up biting the team pretty hard. Because one of the practices, in hindsight, that wasn't very wise is that the managers, they would have everyone on the team, their name, email addresses, and phone numbers. It was for good reasons. They wanted everyone to have each other's information so that they could practice with each other in between team practices. But later on, there was a member of the team that took one of those photocopies and sold it to the casinos for like 30 to 40,000. Then I was introduced to JP. He was one of the managers of the team. For some reason, JP, he wouldn't put your full name on the roster. He would just put your initials. So for me, it was just MA. So I was really lucky because my full name would have been on that list. Unfortunately, the team wasn't very well run or operated, so it ended up failing and dissolving. Well, after that failure, like a new team formed. So I was fortunate to be recruited onto that team in 1994. You could make it akin to the mafia. Like if you bring someone in, you have to vouch for that person. Like that person's on you. So people were vetted very properly before coming in. After we had that great run of success, things just kind of slowly and gradually moved to the point where we weren't making the same type of profits. And it wasn't because we were losing, we just couldn't get down the money. So key players such as myself, we were so well known that we couldn't play anymore. And so about 2001, it got to the point where we just decided to call it quits and disband the team. Currently, I'm in touch with only a few members of the team. So it's good. It's interesting. Everyone's kind of gone on, not surprisingly, to do like some pretty impressive things in different fields. We kind of are nostalgic about the good old days, about that special period that we got to experience. I actually got into nonprofit work, and then the book Bringing Down the House came out. That's when our story became public, and there was a tremendous amount of buzz about it. And then I got pulled back in to blackjack, but just in different aspects as like professional speaker. People started contacting me because they wanted to learn how to play. And then now I'm currently working on a number of entertainment projects that are like blackjack, card counting, gambling based. When I was young, I never even knew that such a profession even existed. And then it was like after my card counting career ended, I realized, well, one, it was my first exposure to entrepreneurship. We did actually learn from our mistakes, run the team as a business. And for me, I've always been a math guy. That was my first real life application of like probability and statistics, right? It's one thing to learn something in a class from a textbook, but it's quite another to experience that in real life. Like after my card counting career, one of the things, one of the common threads, I've been like a data science consultant. I've had a data science boutique firm for a time, and card counting was my first real life experience about the power of like making data driven decisions. And so it's something that has a lot of carryover into other fields. As far as the future of card counting, there's always going to be that opportunity, at least in the US, right? As long as the casinos offer blackjack and they're, dealing in a non-continuous shuffle machine, that dependent event opportunity is always going to exist. You can't count cards online if it's just essentially like just a continuous shuffle in which it's kind of negating those past events. But there are some select online casinos in which the dealer actually does deal the game from a finite set of cards. So unfortunately, they have algorithms and tracking software that can easily identify like advantage players. I mean, what's ironic about card counting and like surveillance in terms of their technology and procedures, they kind of have a symbiotic relationship in a sense. Advantage card counters and advantage players have kind of forced the casinos to adapt and get better. So one tremendous improvement is going from like VHS tapes to like modern day digital cameras. The ability to pull up, footage from, it could be from a year ago at a specific time and place. So that provides the surveillance with a lot more capability to evaluate players. And then the hand in hand with that is just the vast improvement in terms of the databases for undesirable players. And that information's now can be passed instantly and electronically. I mean, in the last 20 years, there's been so many advancements in technology and also in terms of like AI and algorithm development. There are applications of AI for facial recognition, but for the most part, they aren't very effective because as technology gets better and just as important, less expensive, more cost effective, at some point in the future, that's going to be implemented at every table. I mean, today there certainly are card counters still playing, and teams as well. A number of which I know personally. So, as long as casinos offer games that are beatable, there's always going to be people looking to beat the system.
Hi, I'm a producer on Authorized Account. If you like this episode, then you should check out our new podcast. And comment below with the names of people you'd love to hear us interview.